Hello and good evening. So this whole thing about the invisible, the churning on the invisible has started for me a little while back. And everything that's sort of invisible is kind of mysterious, And when I first came into Yarn, which was in Paris, and I was at the time still working at the theatre, but I was a dresser, I was not a dancer anymore. And I was not working with the dolphins anymore, but I was a dresser. And I used to dress in what they call a fast change room, which was right beside the stage, and the girls would come rushing off the stage, and you would quickly remove their whatever costume they had, and you would quickly put another one on, and they would rush back onto the stage. And that's why it was called a quick change dressing room. And I was in this dressing room with another lady, another dresser. And while the girls were on stage, they'd be on stage for about 10 minutes. So we'd be sitting there, right? And I was eager to see how what I'd learned in the Brahma Kumaris Center would rest with her. And so I started talking to her about Yarn and soul consciousness and being a soul. And, I said, how does all of that rest with you? Now, this lady was very outspoken. She was a Cuban. She was very amusing. And I'll never forget what she said. She said, you see that nail up there? She said, I know that in 5 minutes' time, I'm going to hang a costume on that nail. And she says, I believe in that nail. She says, I don't know what else I believe in, but I believe in that nail. And I thought, oh my Lord, this whole thing of doing service and explaining something that's not visible is actually quite complicated because people don't understand. So I naturally thought, oh, well, luckily the Brahmins do understand. Yeah. And slowly, I've been in Gyan now since 82, it's a long time. And I suddenly realized that we don't really take into consideration enough, anywhere near enough, the fact that we are dealing with the invisible. Now, if you think about it, everything that I have right here on my table, which is the computer and my pens and all that, it started in someone's mind. It started in the invisible. And then someone thought, this is useful, and I'm going to build something or make it or have it made. And then it will come into existence. It will exist and will be useful. Now, we are handling all the time, we are handling what is invisible. Spirituality is actually invisible, and the whole logic of our minds has been built up on things that you can see, that are physical. And so it's not that easy to transform your state of mind to accept things that are invisible and so consequently illogical. And I'm seeing now the challenge that people are getting when things that they believed in, that their faith was anchored in, are breaking down. Because your faith, again, it's something that you can't see, and you're believing in something that someone has told you, or the way things are, and you have understood, like the way our economy has functioned and the way religions have got us to believe in religion in our devotional period. And all of a sudden, things are breaking down, and what you had faith in and consequently created for you a hope for the future. Because again, hope is not something you can actually touch. It's not something that is physically manifest. So you're believing in something that's invisible, that is going to manifest because you believe in it. And then all of a sudden, you don't believe it anymore. And people are noticing, especially after now the whole COVID problem, a lot of things that people used to believe in and believed were absolutely secure, and consequently they had faith and trust in this, all of a sudden you can't trust it. They don't have any faith in it anymore. And this is creating an enormous amount of unbalanced challenge for people who are becoming very insecure with this. And it is a challenge for us as BKs because we're handling our transformation on the basis of things we can't see. Virtues, unless you express them, the dynamics that go beneath the virtue, you don't see. And when you don't see something, you know, it sort of slides, it can slide between your fingers. If you can pick something up, it's there. But with us, you know, transformation will only be registered by us as something that really we can say we have mastered, if we can actually prove it in practice. And this is not always that easy. And there are, I mean, I was checking on the various things that we have that are invisible within our transformation. And there are things that are good for a transformation, and there are things that are, you know, going against it. There's the pro and there's the con. And we have to balance this. And this is why so often when we hear the Muli, and I mean, some of the things that Baba says within the Mulis are absolutely fantastic when it comes to, because he is actually he aims very much at creating a pattern for your life. And he tells you at what time to get up in the morning. That you can switch your alarm clock to 4:45 or 3:30, you can do that, and that's physical, and that's easy, you can see it. And then the alarm rings and you can get up and you can make yourself ready for meditation. And along the day, he has made a sort of a scaffolding for our life. And there is Srimat within that. And if we obey, again, the word that has no sort of actual tangible quality to it, unless we practice it, whereupon we will get an effect. By practicing Srimat, you are protected because he is actually putting you into a position where what you're going to be doing is actually creating a benefit for you. Now, of course, when it comes to obedience, and he was on a couple of days ago now about obedience. Of course, if you just remain obedient, you will probably not go very far in the golden age. You need to actually obey Baba, and with what he gives you, create your own understanding on a spiritual level and make the spirituality of the thing logical in your mind so that it exists in that way. And this way you become lawmakers for the golden age. In other words, the spirituality has become logical. Now, once something has become logical, there is no fear of lacking faith in it, or it making you lose hope. You have hope in things that you know are logical. Our logic has to go onto the spiritual dimension. And this is really not as easy. You have to have to first, I mean, I see the first quality you need is a tremendous honesty. Because as I say, these sort of things, you know, how motivated am I? Am I really motivated, or is it just in my mind that I am motivated? And these are things we need to question. Motivation is an energy. If I'm motivated, and there are many things that could motivate me, and some of the things that could motivate me are probably overshadowed by vice of some sort. I might be motivated by doing something better than another person and consequently coming out better. Now, anything that is comparative or critical is not going to create a benefit for the golden age. It will create a temporary satisfaction now, and the possibility of it not being particularly pleasant at some point is very strong. So there are things that can be motivating me which are actually negative, and things that can be motivating me that actually are positive and are pure. Now, to what an extent am I aware of what is actually motivating me? Now, all of this may sound very intellectual in many ways, but getting the intellect around these sort of things is, I think, really necessary if you're going to understand what's actually happening. Now, there are things that Baba tells us, like, for example, there are all kinds of parts of the Maryadas or Srimad that he tells us, which will combat attachment, dependency, being influenced, that kind of thing. Now, to what an extent am I capable of autonomous thinking? This is very important for the golden age. I need to be able to think autonomously. The idea of moving around together with a pack of other people and doing what other people are doing just by watching them is good in the beginning of Gyan, because you don't know. You come in from the outside, you haven't a clue basically of what's going on, and it is normal that you look. But very soon, you need to start creating your own clarity as to why you are doing everything. Because otherwise, you're just following, and your obedience is just a devotional obedience rather than something that is creating a future for you. Anything that's creating a future for you is totally independent. At the golden age, we are all totally independent, yet totally capable of harmonizing with each other. I don't know if you've noticed, but in the present day world, we feel more secure when we belong to a clan, a club, a group, a gang. There are all kinds of words for this, or a family or whatever. And that automatically means that you take a certain group of people, and with those people, you're fine, you feel positive. But anybody who doesn't belong to that group is not your people. Now, these are problems that we come up with all the time in Gyan, and all the time outside of Gyan, because it's a natural way that we have in a very negative world of discriminating who are our friends and who are our enemies. And we're doing this to protect ourselves. Of course, when you're in Gyan, you use Baba's protection. You don't really need to get yourself protected. You need to be smart and not expose yourself to danger. Now, all of this, everything that I'm saying here, is based on something that's not visible. Where, I mean, sometimes we will express and say, oh, you know, danger. And the typical example is the little old lady that sits in front of the television and watches these films. And then, of course, she gets scared witless that someone might break into her house and do her some harm. You know what I mean? She's taking on the fear that is being sold to her. And that's a typical example. Yeah. But fear can be something that is in us, and fear again is not visible unless something actually happens, whereupon it is normal to fear. Sometimes we don't fear things that we should fear. I don't know if all of it's very strange. I don't know if what I'm saying here is making really a lot of sense. Because, for example, the points this morning on purity, for example, where Baba said, you know, you absolutely must follow purity. And I remember every time in Madhuban when we had a retreat with guests that were not Brahmins, and the guests would come up with that question. Well, you know, they discovered we were all following celibacy. And so they would say, well, how do you expect the world to go on? You know, and in those particular moments, they always let Didi Nirmala handle the group. And she was wonderful. And by a couple of years after the beginning, we all knew what she was going to say anyway. But she was absolutely wonderful. Now, you know, what is it that actually, why is it that Baba is asking us to follow purity? And when he says purity, he means celibacy. You know, he doesn't, well, I mean, when I first came into Gyan, it wasn't clear for me. When I was told purity, I thought he meant mineral water, you know, filtered through the sand on the mountains, and, you know, it comes out pure. I was figuring it was something like that. I didn't pick up on what he meant till I was told. But what does purity actually do for you? And what happens when purity is not there? Now, I would say that spiritually, you know, purity is what makes the invisible visible. The purer you are, the more you will be aware of all the invisible stuff going on in you and in others. If you're not living pure, you won't notice. And it's like purity, I mean, impurity is like a fog. Have an idea in the early morning, the fog coming up, and you can't see your hand in front of your face. Now, the moment you start following purity, the fog dissipates. Now, it's not the fog of physical things, it's the fog of spiritual factors. You become much more sensitive to something that is not visible. Now, becoming sensitive to the invisible is like developing an extra sensory form of perception. We all have sense organs, and they either function very well, less well, but certain animals have much better sense perception than we do. I mean, certain dogs have been trained to determine certain illnesses through their sense of smell. Human beings can't do it. We don't have the capacity. But there is a form of ultra or non-sensory perception which we need to develop, and this is promoted through purity. If you're not following celibacy, there is no way you can actually see through the fog. Now you might say, well, why? How come this is a limitation that we have? Well, it is. I mean, humanity has gone into totally believing only in what they can feel, see, touch, smell, whatever. Now, every now and again, like last week, science takes a good knock, and you know, the submarine that went down to look at the Titanic, well, it imploded, didn't it? And that was a big knock on the head for science. Every now and again, science has its disasters. Science is not something you can trust. It is something so physical, and yet to trust it implicitly is a mistake. And we're seeing that more and more and more things or people that have been trusting are now getting very confused. And I personally, I mean, have great questions as to how can I illuminate them? How can I help them? This is why I'm going into all of this journey. It's not always, I mean, it's easy to say to someone, oh, you know, you're a soul and the soul is invisible and all of that. But to actually get them to understand deeply is much more complicated, because they need to be able to really trust. Now, we look back in the past and we don't really have the understanding of how things got where they've gotten. I remember looking at, I didn't actually go to Egypt, but looking at the big blocks of stone that built the pyramids and wondering as a child at school how the men got those blocks up there. They had no engines, no motors, no electricity. They had only human energy and, let's say, horses, camels, elephants, or whatever else. Now, that goes for most of history till man started becoming the lords of matter in a physical way, controlling it physically. And we believe that that's the only way of doing it. We took a scientist to Madhuban some years ago in one of these guest retreats, and he was a cybernetic physicist. And I translated, because he was Italian, I translated his discussion with Jagdish. Now, what he said was, I'm willing to believe that destruction is coming, but he said, I don't want to believe it, because I do want to continue to believe that we can do, as humanity, we can do something about this. It was very difficult for him to accept that humanity would have to admit defeat on the material level. And now, I've had 2 cases now of people who have referred to me that how difficult things are now since post-COVID, etc. And we will be having a lot of service to do. More and more people are very confused. And we need to be extremely clear, honest, and give them something that we ourselves can trust on a spiritual level. They have to see that it works, in other words. And if we can prove that, they will be only too happy to go along with us. But just theory now does not really hit the spot. And so this is why I'm going into this, because everything that we actually practice will actually produce an effect that they can see. Now, if they see, and this is the same with our Lockheed families, if they can see that our sanskars are actually changing, they will be interested. If they see that we are happy, they will be interested, because they will want to know how we did it. And that is a good start to the explanation. I would say there are certain things that we find extremely complicated for our transformation. One, for example, we have to look at our own sanskars. I mean, we can't just, well, you could, I've done it. I must admit, I've done it. You can trundle along, you can cruise along in Gyan quite comfortably, actually, without really looking at anything deeper. But there will always be a moment in drama where you will have a realization or a murli something, or something someone says, and you will realize that you've lost the rhythm. You're not on top of it anymore. It's like drama is like like those moving carpets you can get in airports. Drama is moving along. And as long as your progress is going at the speed of drama, you will be okay. But if you start cruising and resting, you will find discomfort in the speed in which you're going along. You will find it's not the right speed. And you will find that there are moments where you will feel very uncomfortable. Now, Baba is helping us an enormous amount. And one of the, I mean, some of the most, basically, you know, I've got a list of things, the things that are helping us. And one, of course, is what I've just said, was motivation. Another one is aim. Do I have an aim for my future role at the Golden Age? Can I assess where my sanskars sit and what that would mean? What kind of responsibility can I take on for the Golden Age? What can I offer society? These are all questions we need to ask, because it's useless saying, well, Baba says we're all going to be princes and princesses. But then the next sentence, he will talk about the subjects. And we may think, oh, well, you know, Baba's saying we're going to be princes and princesses. And if you say so, there's a good amount of trust in what Baba says. But Baba's saying these things to stimulate us to see if it really does coincide with what our aim is, maybe, at that particular point. Is my aim something that would coincide with being a prince and princess, and so consequently a future king or queen? And what does that mean? What responsibility would that mean? And I may not be interested in that kind of thing. To what extent do I have the courage to say, it's courage. It's courage to say, yes, I am going to be a king. And you put into practice what you need to be that, because otherwise you're being illogical. And what will happen was, when the end comes, you'll say, oh, you know, I'm very sad because I haven't achieved what I wanted to achieve. And I think that would be a very unpleasant position to be in, is to not have really had your aim clear as to what you really wanted to be and what that would mean. Because Baba's quite clear about these things as to what it does mean. And this is why you really need to use the knowledge and think about it. You must continually, regularly, and this is what he calls study. He doesn't mean for you to learn things by heart. What he means is that you need to think it over. What does it look like? What does it look like in practice? What's underneath it? You know, so you have to look at it, what's underneath, what's above, what's the side, the whole thing. And for example, some of the things that go against us are laziness. I mean, laziness is just about omnipresent. There is always a moment when we feel lazy. Either we are tired, you know, which is quite justified. You understand that. But laziness is one of the big handicaps. Now it's not a particularly negative thing, but it is a handicap. And then you've got dependency, where you need someone else to sustain you. And when I say someone else, I don't mean Baba. You're influenced by other people's opinions. You're insecure. These are all things that I see and that I've seen over the years in myself. Then there is fear for whatever there may be. Fear about the physical body, fear about illness, fear about what's going to become of me when I get old. I'm 83. I'm wondering what's going to happen, right? When I'm old, who's going to look after me? Yeah. Oh, yeah, Baba. Well, yes. Yeah. Now, I have to have a lot of faith in Baba to trust that something will happen. He will inspire someone to help those people that need help. So a lot depends on, you know, just how much I am practicing, because if I am really practicing, I have the faith it will happen because my karma indicates. If your karma is good, someone will. But there again, that's, in a certain sense, it's fear. Then you've got all your past impressions, and these are very often projections and things that happened to you as a child, and you project that onto situations and people. And these are very hard to overcome. They really are. And all of these things are, well, you know, I very often felt, to be honest, because of my own positioning and having been brought up basically in a foreign country. I mean, I nearly always was in a foreign country from about the age 5 onwards. And that always then increasingly brought a feeling of xenophobia. At school, I was known as the foreigner. Now that, in my mind, created a habit of feeling that I would be excluded. Now that is going to be, for me, for example, I'm giving my own example, it's the only one I really know, that will be handicapping me on a spiritual level. Because being either part of one country or not. And I one day told Daddy Junkie, I can do what you like, I will never be Indian. So what am I going to do about it? That's the way it is. And I was used to this feeling of being outcast since I was small. Now, all of that will create problems for me as I go forward into soul consciousness, where there really is no feeling of xenophobia or feeling of another, you know, or there shouldn't be. Then, of course, there is our comfort zones where we ourselves avoid what we know we shouldn't be avoiding. You know, all of these things are very easy to forget because they're not you know, sitting on your table. This I can't forget. I just can maybe not, I may be looking for it, but I can't forget it because this sits on my table and it's there and I can see it. So I will find it. So we need to see all of this and realize, you know, to what an extent am I really perceiving what's going on, and am I really making the right efforts? Because, I mean, you could be making efforts that were not really useful. Now, that would be tragic. You'll be really wasting your time, maybe making enormous efforts, which are actually not bringing you the result that you would like. So I'm seeing the chat filling up. I don't know. I mean, a lot of the stuff is, of course, in Turkish or whatever. I don't know if I need to stop and look for questions.
Yes, Wendy. No, there are not questions. They're just some information about the souls that are logging in with not their name, but with for security reasons. But there are no any questions. They're not questions, as I can see now.
Oh, okay. No, because I saw all this writing. I thought they might.
No, they're not questions. So you can continue if you want. Everything was so interesting, and we have to think about it.
Well, this is it. It's a very strange subject matter in a certain sense, and I was wondering how people were feeling about this. But you know, a spiritual practice is not something that is that easy. It's not that obvious. And of course, Baba says, easy Raj Yoga, you know. Well, it's easy if you want to just conceive it as easy, but the actual, maybe this is why there are so few, comparatively few, well, he was saying, you know, 8 generations of Lakshmi and Narayan and 12 of Rama and Sita. I mean, that's not an enormous number of kings and queens. Yeah. And probably because this is complex. And we need to look really very closely at what is invisible. And we don't, I mean, I personally much prefer to read something off my email or look at something that is online. I much prefer that than digging into something I can't see. It demands an enormous amount of concentration, I find. And literally that can only happen when you do it regularly and you take a point from Baba's Muli. Like, I mean, there were quite a few points today that were really, really useful. Because if you come to think of it, this pursuit of the invisible has been unsuccessful. We've looked for God. Now, God is invisible, but we've settled for, depending on where we went or where we came, we either settled for Krishna or we settled for Christ or someone else. And it all sort of focalized on a human. And this unfocalizing on humans and removing that focus and seeing ourselves as beings that are literally invisible, seeing ourselves as being invisible is really not, and yet I've been in Yarn for 40 years, you know. Baba is still on about soul consciousness every day, which means we're not catching on. We're not catching on as much as he would like us to catch on. And so this demands an enormous amount of work. Now, personally, for example, one of the big positive areas that we have is self-esteem, for example. Anything that we can do that will provoke self-esteem is going to help us move forward. And if we can see, for example, things in the past that we've done, and maturity, if we've been lived a little bit before Gyan, we were lucky. You know, I had quite a life before Gyan, which permitted me to have experiences, and these have been extremely useful. And there are times when I didn't know anything about Baba, but I still look at what I did and thought, you know, okay, that was, you didn't have Gyan, but that was not bad. Maybe your motivation wasn't perfect, but it was good. And these are things that I will look back on, and in Gyan too, of course, and I will look back on those things. And as it's good to, you know, remember these things actively, because then when you remember, when you are proud of yourself, that degree of self-respect will grow. And you can only grow your self-respect, not by sort of listening to people applauding you, because that's going to go in one ear and out of the other, you know, or you will need the constant applause to be able to feel good. And that's a dependency. So it's so easy to go into the negative. But if you think about what you have done and you genuinely are proud of it, looking at it in accordance with what Baba says, that will sustain you. That will help you. It will help you believe in the fact that you can be victorious. Baba speaks about being victorious. And you can't just say, well, if you say so, you know, I believe in you. Don't forget that God is invisible. And it's a good idea to believe in him, but it's a good idea to listen very closely to what he's saying, because he's not going to do it for you. This is the big difference between Gyan and some form of devotion. I mean, I live two miles away from the Vatican. And, you know, I was brought up in a Catholic school, and, you know, the Christians are absolutely certain that Christ died on the cross for them and all their sins will be wiped out because he's done the wiping. Well, yeah, we know that doesn't work. The moment you come into Gyan, that means that you've got to do the wiping. That's a completely different situation. And so you really have to have the courage to face up to what you need to wipe and wipe it. And there's nothing really sort of, I mean, Baba's been quite negative in the last few days with some mulis, avyak mulis, etc. There's been some avyak mulis where there wasn't one single positive line, actually, basically. But then on the other hand, I can see that what he's saying is just there to shake us up, you know, and make us aware. Because putting us to sleep is not going to help. But being aggressive would make us lose hope. And if we lose hope, I mean, then we won't be able to be victorious. It's a delicate game that he's playing. It's very delicate, but it's very functional if you go along with him. I mean, I've got several students now who have referred to me, one personally, but referred to me. And this is why I realized, you know, that we're going to have to be very logical in our spirituality. To what an extent is my expression of spirituality logical to people outside? Because these people, their logic is, oh, well, two people, and I said this to me, oh, I'll keep going till I can, and then I'll commit suicide. Well, just sitting there listening to this is not what I intend to do. But at the moment, I don't know whether I have in me the capacity to make something spiritual totally logical for them. That's a challenge. I find that a challenge because I realize just knowing their souls doesn't help. It doesn't hit the spot. And this is, I think, depending on each one of us as to how we function, we have to find our way to this. And for some people, it will just be our own stability. Human beings, I have great respect for human beings, but there's something very weird. Why is it that this is something that I queried a lot before. How come we're so intelligent and yet we don't know, really, we're always in doubt as to whether someone loves us or not? And as a child, I could see, we take the daisy, and you go, he loves me not, he loves me not. How come there is this doubt? I mean, there's a big lack of awareness if we are on that level. To what an extent do we know that an expression of happiness is true, or whether it's just a fake smile? Now, if we develop our spirituality, we should know those things. There should be no doubt in our mind at all, none. This is what I mean by spiritual logic. There should be a clarity on these things, which means that if I'm clear about it, the people that see me will feel that stability of clarity. And that will make them trust, because they probably will never develop that form of soul consciousness that will make them trust and believe in the invisible, i.e. God. But somehow they'll realize there is God, and that I know God and trust him, or we know God and trust him. And although it's invisible to them, they will see us. And I've got a nasty feeling this is what's going to happen, because it will depend on us. I mean, Baba's expecting this of us. He's expecting us to, as he said, I mean, I love it when he said that Baba, yesterday, he said that Baba protected the devotees. The people that really loved God, but somehow they never managed to actually meet him. Well, they will be protected by their pure hearts. A pure heart will recognize a pure heart. They may be living impure. They will recognize that we've done our work, and that spirituality is something that is solid and logical, because that's what it is. I mean, the Catholic faith believes that Jesus was conceived in a pure way, but they have no understanding that that was a method of procreation years before, and Mary, there was no reason that she should not be able to do that. She was unusual at that time in the drama, but it's perfectly doable. Parthenogenesis still exists. I mean, I read, these are lovely stories, I read not very long ago on the computer that in some zoo, a snake laid eggs and produced babies without any contact whatsoever with a male snake. And oh, well, if a snake can do it, I'm sure I can. In the golden age, of course, not now, but in the golden age when matter is pure, why not? I mean, these are the sort of forms of awareness that we need to think of. To what an extent am I really aware of what Baba is saying. I mean, the power over matter in the Golden Age is total. He says we're the masters of matter. Now, do we think that we're the masters of matter because we make of it what we want to make of it and that we control it physically? I don't think so. I think we control it mentally. And what would that look like? And here, I mean, I enjoy very much because I think that there's much more truth in Harry Potter than in some of the ideas that we might have about the Golden Age. And the beauty of interacting with animals and interacting with nature, if you are the masters of nature. But unless you open your mind up to something that is invisible, you're not going to get that. Because that's an energy that is totally invisible, and yet it is totally functional. It won't ever go wrong. It won't go, you can't have any accidents. I mean, I love it when Baba says the Vimans, you know, a child can fly it, there will not be any accidents. Allah.
So, Wendy, there is a question here. What's your suggestion for how to study so that we do not lose time anymore?
I believe, personally, I believe a lot in thinking. What Baba calls study doesn't mean that you read the Murli 25 times and try and remember it by heart. That's not what he means by study. He means that you take points of the Murli and you apply them to things that you know, or things you believe, or things that society believes and would like you to believe. There's all kinds of options there for churning. Churning is where it's at. If you churn, you will make your own understanding of what Baba is saying. Baba is very clear, but he's clear on an explanation level. He doesn't tell you how it got there, and you need to work out for yourself how it got there. And you will only do that if you open up to thinking about it really quite deeply. And so to me, I mean, the way of expressing it in a Brahmin way of expression is to churn, really. Take the knowledge and apply it to what you know, what you believe, what your culture believes, because all the cultures are different, or slightly different at least. Some of them are very different. What would be the absolute rules in the Golden Age? Because you don't, I mean, the rules are all embedded within each soul. I mean, he keeps saying, you know, there are no lawyers, there are no judges, there are no high courts, there are no police force. How does that happen? What does it mean? It means that we embed the right way of doing things in such a way that nothing goes wrong. It's fascinating. And that doesn't mean just someone in the group and that everybody follows that someone. It's each one who individually can do that. And that we do it together. There's no need to express. There are no orders, authority figures like we fear them these days. There aren't there. because each person is their own authority, and quite rightly so, without any form of arrogance or trying to impose their ideas on other people.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So you gave us so much food for thought.
Well, I don't know. It's very weird, huh? I mean, it's a very weird subject, really. But I sort of, I mean, in other cultures, they've taken these things and practiced them. For example, when I first came into Gyan, I was translating. I used to translate professionally too at times. I was translating for a Hopi Red Indian chief. He was a shaman, this man. And I would translate him into French. He was American. I would translate him into French. And I went to retreats and translated him and sat beside him and did all the translation. And he was absolutely fascinating because they have a methodology which they call, and which would work for us too, dreaming the dream awake. And that is what you would call lucid dreaming. You dream it so strongly. In a lucid, it's not an uncontrolled dream like you might have when you're asleep. It's a controlled dream, which means that your thoughts are actually a creative power. And that's why they call it dreaming the dream awake. Because you're dreaming it all the time, it's awakening. And that's what happens to the Golden Age. It's the same principle that they use. We need to really, not think, again, maybe we're leaving it up to Baba. You say, if you see that, well, yeah, I'll go along with that, no problem, I'll follow. Well, no, there aren't any followers. You've got to create it. If you're going to go to the Golden Age, you're going to have to create it. If you're going to go to the Silver Age, you will create that. What's the difference between one and the other? And if you need to decide where you want to go and go where you want to go and not where someone else tells you, you have to know that and then choose. It's a choice.